Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. We've got some interesting topics to cover in today's video, including our first off-season beef between Larry McReynolds and Denny Hamlin. Plus, Kevin Harvick had some thoughts about Martin Truex Jr. racing in 2025, and the Fox announcer unexpectedly brought up Jimmie Johnson. And yesterday, NASCAR released the 2025 schedule with times, and I have some thoughts. Plus, we have our last in-season by the numbers segment. However, before we get to those stories, I want to start off with a huge thank you to you guys. Why, you ask? This morning, the channel hit 10,000 subscribers, and I am incredibly humbled. When I launched this channel in May of 2023, I had no idea how it would go. I just knew I wanted to talk about this sport in a way that was different than my writing about it, and so I started posting videos. You guys have been so incredibly supportive from the start. And I have to say, in these last 18 months, you guys have been there for me in some really difficult times. I'm going to try and not get emotional, but I'm sure some of you who have followed me for a while remember back to a year ago this time. I was right in the middle of helping my mom in her final days battling against cancer. I shared those painful personal times with you, and you guys encouraged and lifted up me and my family. Before she passed, my mom could see the love shown by you guys as I would read her some of your comments. I remember how she was so proud. So thank you to each and every one of you who have clicked on that subscribe button in the last 18 months and made this YouTube experience for me an absolute blast and blessing. And we're just getting started. Stick around at the end and I'm going to have a giveaway to celebrate the milestone. All right, now let's get to what you're here for. Some NASCAR news. I want to go back to Tuesday and talk about the words of Larry McReynolds. But before we discuss those words, I want to go back to last week and Denny Hamlin's Actions Detrimental podcast when he said this.
I can tell you this, and it's not their fault or his fault or anyone, but if Joey Logano wins this title, there is going to be a wrath on social media about this format. The format is broken, and if you disagree, you're in denial.
So anyone who disagrees with the format being broken is in denial. Enter Larry McReynolds. Here's what America's crew chief had to say about it on Tuesday.
Here is one thing I'm going to conclude, and I'm not trying to offend anyone. I respect people's opinion. I really do. I may challenge them, and I may lay things out there you don't want to hear, but I do respect people's opinion. But my conclusion, Danielle, now that we're almost 2 full days removed from this championship being decided at Phoenix, based on people I've talked to, based on our callers for the last 2 days, if we are chasing a tweak for people that don't like it, we are chasing a small, itsy-bitsy percentage of our fans. That's my conclusion. But the warning shot I fire, and I would even fire this shot toward Elton Sawyer NASCAR. Tweak it if you want. Tweak it if you may. But I'm telling you, the cream is still going to rise to the top. The good, solid teams that win races and wins championships, they're going to adjust to what you change.
Later in the day on Tuesday on his podcast, Hamlin proposed an idea for modifying the playoffs that would include doubling the regular season points with 16 drivers competing in a first round of 7 races. The top 4 in points advance to make the 3-race final round, and the points leader after 3 races wins the championship. Dirty Mo Media shared that format on X, and Larry Mack responded. So just what we need. Again, our champion could go through the entire 10-race playoff, not win a race, might not need to, and at the final race, back possibly to where for one driver headed into the race, a clinch scenario. Now this would be nail-biting and exciting. #unbelievable. Hamlin saw McReynolds' response and fired back with a response of his own. Hey Larry, I know facts are hard to comprehend, but we actually had a champion crowned in trucks by a driver who didn't win at all during the season under this format. #believe it. Sorry, so what were you saying about winning again? Ouch, shots fired. But surprisingly, the 3-time Daytona 500 champion wasn't done. A few minutes later, he added more. Oh, and if you could stop spreading disinformation to your listeners about our lawsuit, I would really appreciate it. Thanks. All I could think when I saw what Hamlin wrote, was he was referring to some harsh remarks by Larry Mack early October on SiriusXM that I didn't hear, but Brett Winningham of Speedway Digest did. We've got an organization that's been here not even 4 years that all of a sudden is saying we gotta change the way NASCAR's run. I'm all about change. Change is what makes you better. But you know what? When I see Richard Childress, Jack Roush, Rick Hendrick, and Joe Gibbs, that's been here longer than some of these guys have been pooping yellow, and they signed off and said this is good, we're okay. There's things we don't like about it, but we're going to do what's best for the sport and best for our business. And they signed off on it. And these people that have been either not competitive or only been here for 4.5 years have been saying the way we've done business for 76.5 years is wrong. Who knew we'd have a beef so early in the off season? And I'm guessing this isn't done. I'll certainly be keeping an eye on it in the weeks ahead. Moving on to our next story, and it came yesterday when NASCAR released the 2025 schedule with times. Before I looked at it, I thought back to a story I wrote earlier this year when Dale Earnhardt Jr. was talking about how it's not NASCAR, but the networks that determine the start times for the races. That whole conversation came about after Michigan postponed its race to the next day due to weather. And of course, fans questioned why the race started so late. Jr. talked about the start times and admitted how it's frustrating because there's no consistency. So looking at the first 14 races on Fox or FS1 in 2025 and comparing them with the 2024 slate, it appears the network is really trying to make it more consistent. In 2024, excluding the Clash and the All-Star race because those are exhibitions, and the other 12 races, 8 of them had start times of 3 or 3:30. The others were 2:30 at the Daytona 500 and Atlanta, 7 p.m. at Richmond, and 2 o'clock at Dover. This coming season, outside of those same 2 races, every race on the Fox portion of the schedule has a 3 or 3:30 start time except for the Daytona 500, which is again at 2:30. When the coverage transitions to Amazon Prime, we have a couple of night races to begin with, the Coca-Cola 600 at 6, and a week later at Nashville at 7. The other 3 races are at 2 and 3. For TNT's 5 races, the first event at Atlanta is a night race that starts at 7, and Sonoma starts at 3:30. The other 3 races, including Chicago, all start at 2. For fans of the Windy City race, we might actually get a full race in this season. Unfortunately, in NBC's 14-race portion of the schedule, fans will have to check weekly because there are 6 different start times in there. Yes, 6. And lastly, something I have heard from fans that I think is worth discussing is the broadcast being carried on the main network channels. In 2024, Fox aired 10 points-paying races on the big network, while the others were carried on FS1. In 2025, that number on Fox drops to 4. As for NBC, in their half of the 2024 schedule, they aired 9 points-paying races on the main network. That number in 2025, like Fox, also drops to just 4. Clearly, the times are changing both literally and figuratively. And our last story for the day, which will help us transition to our By the Numbers segment, comes from Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour podcast this week. The Fox announcer talked about the championship race in Phoenix and it being the final race in the full-time career of Martin Truex Jr. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I hope he doesn't come back and race, honestly. I think that when we see Jimmie Johnson come back and race, it's not the Jimmie Johnson that we're used to seeing, up front, competitive, doing the things that he did. And I hope Martin just, if he's going to race, not race a cup car. I just hope that, he can keep his career intact and the way that everybody thinks about him with the performances that he had over the last several years and being competitive.
Clearly, Harvick feels like Jimmie Johnson's return has somewhat soured the way he feels about the 7-time champion's career. Coincidentally, I was actually thinking about Johnson's legacy over the weekend when I saw him go for a spin in practice at Phoenix. So I went through his last 2 years of numbers, and here's what I discovered. He's run 12 races in that time. He has 5 DNFs, including 2 this year, and his best finish is 26th, which he achieved on Sunday in Phoenix. His average finishing position over these 2 years is 32.92. Listen, I get Harvick's perspective, and I'm sure many fans feel the same way, watching Johnson's repeated poor results. But I can also see the driver's perspective as someone who just loves to race and wants to be behind the wheel. But for Johnson, it's actually More than that, he said as much over the weekend in the desert when acknowledging that he absolutely wants to keep driving in 2025 and gain more experience while helping build Legacy's notebook. Honestly, at the end of the day, it's Johnson's decision. He's already in the Hall of Fame. His legacy is secure. So why should he care what others think about him when he's still having fun and getting something accomplished for his team in the process? All right, moving on to more statistics and our By the Numbers segment. This one is going to be our year in review, and we won't do our average finishing position over the last 5 races, but the entire year. It should come as no surprise to anyone that Chase Elliott, who was Mr. Consistency all year, holds down the top spot at 11.7, a full number ahead of second best, and Christopher Bell at 12.8. A pair of HMS drivers follow in Kyle Larson and William Byron, but take a look at that top 10. There are 2 Fords there, and neither one of them is the champion. Logano comes in at 13th with an AFP of 17.1. Others worth noting are Martin Truex Jr., who finished at 17.4, 1 spot behind Logano, and he was followed by his JGR teammate, Ty Gibbs. I think what's interesting is if you go back and look at the first 10 races of this year, both the numbers 19 and 54 were at the top of this list. Further down the list, it's interesting to see how Corey LaJoie and Justin Haley are right next to each other after swapping cars late in the year. And checking out those last few, we can see why Jimmie Johnson is trying to get information for the Legacy Notebook, with John Hunter Nemechek struggling to a 25.4 average finishing position. And I want to wrap up the By the Numbers segment with a broader perspective of the next-gen Gen 7 car and how drivers have performed after 3 full seasons. And interestingly, it's quite similar to this season at the top. The sport's most popular driver leads the way at 12.4 and is followed by C. Bell. Willie B. and Larson swap spots from the 2024 numbers, and they are followed by Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, Ross Chastain, Chris Buescher, Martin Truex Jr., and Joey Logano wraps up the top 10. You look at that top 10 and it breaks down into 4 Chevys, 3 Toyotas, and 3 Fords. You'd say that equals parity in the Gen 7 car, which it does as far as race wins are concerned, but it doesn't necessarily translate to championships, as Penske has won all 3. And depending on who you ask, the legitimacy of the last one remains in question. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this episode. I want to get your thoughts. What do you think about the beef between Denny Hamlin and Larry McReynolds? Who do you side with? Moving on to the schedule, any times in there that surprise you? Anything you wish they had done differently? And lastly, what did you think about Harvick's remarks recommending that Martin Truex Jr. not do what Jimmie Johnson is doing and stick with the Xfinity Series? Do you think Johnson continuing to race is tarnishing his legacy? And finally, as I mentioned earlier, as a small token of appreciation to you guys for hitting the 10,000 subscriber mark, I'm going to do my first of several giveaways with one of my special edition hats and shirts that features this logo to a pair of lucky fans. Just comment on this video and you're entered. I'll select the random winner and announce them in Monday's video along with the winner of the Martin Truex Jr. helmet. Thanks again for checking out the latest video and supporting the channel. I really, really appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day.